Yes, I know what episode this is. I don't do milestones. I find the practice completely self-congratulatory, and I don't see what's so special about reaching a number that I would eventually reach as long as I didn't outright end the series. And with as many of these games that seem to exist, it doesn't seem like I'll run out of anything but sanity by the time I'm finished. However, I understand that people tend to hold a special place in their hearts for these kind of occasions, and they'd expect that I'd do something to celebrate this. Now, can we get on with this? Okay, I guess I can do something kinda special. As I've stated in past episodes, and most recently in the Ragnarok 2 episode, is that I'll tend to stay away from the older games for various reasons. These games have a long-established history, a well-set-in-their-ways fanbase, and unfortunately are going to be the primary audience for a show that's targeted specifically at new players. Henceforth, I brace myself for the storm of complaints and nitpicks. I'm not someone so desperate for views that I'll take an enraged MMO player's negativity as good press. My perspective is going to be different from someone who's been ingrained in the game's playstyle, memes, and culture for years. It's just how it works. But I do understand why people might want me to bring some of these games to light. There's a history to many of them, and they've had influences on the modern MMOs of today. Without them, we wouldn't be where we are in one way or another. So, let's look into a game with an established fanbase, its own share of influence, and ongoing and upcoming expansions. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Everquest 2. Again, let me invoke my MMO Grinder newbie clause here. Despite the sheer amount of stuff available to players and longtime players of Everquest 2, this show is made for newcomers, to reflect the experience of someone new finding their way to Everquest 2, and not someone who's being let in by a friend, or someone who's going to do a ton of Wikipedia research on game systems beforehand just to figure out something that should have been included in the tutorial. Also, as a free-to-play review show, I am not going to accept, "oh my god, just pay for it," as an answer to a criticism about withheld content. I subscribe to the philosophy that a good free-to-play model should make you want to pay for it, not need to. Okay, enough of that. Published and developed by SOE, Everquest 2 is the sequel to the former MMO reigning champion Everquest. Why look at the sequel before the original? 1. If I'm gonna look at an older MMO, I don't want to go that old. And 2. I'm fascinated by the fact that this game went free-to-play well before the original Everquest did. It shows the staying power of original titles, I guess. Why weren't fans willing to move on to the next game? Well, it's not like I'm going to actually find out by playing it. Well, let's just get this started. Aged is the word that comes to mind here, but there is a definite weird juxtaposition going on. The character models actually look very nice. The faces are all animated and stylized, and the armor, well, the majority of it at least, look highly detailed with some good texturing effects. Which is why it's so odd that the environments don't really look this way. These stay more to the polygonal, and texturing of them remains generally low-res. I was immediately reminded of the Marine Corps Marpat digital camouflage pattern the first time I zoomed in to look at one of the pieces of grass in Greater Fadark. I will say, though, that age aside, they do well with what they have. It's a pretty atmospheric game, and the general world design has plenty of interesting landmarks and areas to behold. It grows on you, is what I'm getting at. The game, in another manner that's also showing its age, seems to want to default to a 4:3 aspect ratio and remain in windowed mode. There's an option to go into full screen mode, but tabbing out seems to automatically set the game back to windowed mode, so I just didn't bother to fight it after a while. One final quirk of the game is the fact that combat animation, save for your abilities and or spells, but your auto attacks, don't really seem to sync up with the damage you do. It's not uncommon to see your character swing their weapon at an enemy and cause no damage, and then see damage numbers appear while your character is just standing still. This is due to a by default hidden bar that shows how often you complete your auto attacks, and if you want to strategize these hits, and not have to rely on these misleading animations, you might wish to make this bar more prominent and visible. I'd highly suggest tweaking the interface settings in general to your taste, as the addition to the above-mentioned auto-attack bar, the chat block in many areas is nigh impossible to read unless you change the window transparency to opaque, or at least near opaque, just to have a better background to read the print. I have no complaints about this music. It's heavily fantasy-based, but well orchestrated, and there's a lot of variety to the soundtrack. It's a really good listen, even if the game uses its fair share of silent moments. This is especially common when you're just out adventuring, as you'll notice music will often kick in while you're battling, and it does help to punctuate the combat. It will definitely be noticeable, but the nature of the game might have you looking for your own personal soundtrack instead, as the major emphasis of questing and monster fighting means that you'll be spending a good amount of time in the same areas and not really giving you too much musical variety. The music's good and all, but you might enjoy it more just listening to it separate from the game and uninterrupted by the sounds. Sound design varies a bit in the game. There's a few recognizable stock sound effects, but there are plenty of original recorded sounds as well. And a very noticeable quirk being certain enemy creatures, like orcs, getting their own languages that they'll yell at you while you attack. Your character also speaks in short bits during combat that you can modify with different voice clips, and many NPCs have voice-acted dialogue. It's all done really competently.
Continue to gather and examine all the items you find until all the icons of that collection are highlighted in your quest journal.
I got no complaints all around. Solid sound work. Signing into the game, the first thing I'd noticed was an epilepsy warning, which kind of struck me as odd, but it's there. Maybe a sign of the times from when the game came out, but I really wouldn't consider this game so flashy that it could trigger epilepsy in any more than any other MMO or computer game. But it's there, so there you go. Starting out takes you to the character selection page. As of recent, a new feature allows you to immediately create a character at level 85. For a short while, doing this was free, but any other time will now require some form of station cash fee. Since this video will be far past the time frame that you'll have to make a level 85 character for free, my bad. Even so, I would advise not making your first character a level 85, paid or otherwise, unless you specifically have a friend to guide you through the game. There is a lot of mechanics here that will intimidate you to hell if you don't at least have a basic grasp on what's going on. There's a few selectable servers in the game with PvP and PvE laws similar to a lot of fantasy MMOs. There's also an RP server, which I chose to roll on, which oddly enough, along with one other PvE server, is one of the two most populated servers in the game. Luckily, there are 2 character slots, and you can create a second character, and only a second character if you're playing for free. Once you create a new character, you'll be asked to choose your class. There are 4 main class types of Fighter, Priest, Mage, and Scout, each with a large variety of subclass focuses. Fighters can take on the roles of a Guardian, Berserker, Monk, Bruiser, and Shadow Knight, or Paladin. Priests can focus on being Templar, Inquisitors, Wardens, Furies, Mystics, and Defilers. Mages can choose to be Wizards, Warlocks, Illusionists, Coercers, Conjurers, and Necromancers. And Scouts can choose to be Swashbucklers, Brigands, Troubadours, Rangers, and Assassins, along with the Dirge, which is best described as an anti-minstrel that uses music as a weapon to debuff their enemies and enrage their allies to fight stronger. Interesting concept to say the least. Scouts also hold the only paid content-only class in the game called the Beast Lord, who wield animal companions. Each main class also makes use of a certain stat in order to improve, as fighters will focus solely on strength, priests on their wisdom, mages intelligence, and scouts agility, regardless of the subclass chosen. For reference, I chose to make my newbie character as a ranger. There you can choose your race, of which there are many to choose from, and each with their own alignments and abilities. Choose the one that best suits you, especially if you've always wanted to play as a cat person, a mouse person, or a fairy. Jumping into the game will throw all of the windows at you, and that might get overwhelming, unless you sort out what's supposed to go where. If you have a webcam hooked to your PC, one of the first things you might notice is that your webcam suddenly turns on and starts recording your face while placing a portrait of your character beside you. I'll explain more about how this works in Community, since that focus pertains mostly to that aspect of the game. Controls are as simplistic as you'd expect, using WASD to move and clicking on the environment to interact with objects and skills. Skills are relegated to your hotkeys, and the hotbar can be easily extended as you'd like by right-clicking on the bottom bar and choosing Add Hotbar to add up to 4 general hotbars and a few more different styles of hotbars. You can either double-click on an enemy or NPC to speak to the NPC or attack the enemy, or you can right-click on that enemy or NPC to bring up a small sub-menu of options like Examine, Attack, or Hail. This can be done with most interactive objects like collection nodes. Combat is basically target and click, using skills and auto-attacks to face the enemy. Combat will seem quite slow to those more used to modern MMOs, and there's a methodical purpose to what you can use, should use, and when. Many of the skills have fairly long cooldowns, and the auto-attacks themselves can take various amounts of time, with my Ranger's daggers taking an average of 4 to 6 seconds to trigger, and swords taking upwards of 6 seconds or longer, and automatic bow shots taking upwards of 9 seconds per shot. Use of skills is more of your key to victory. In addition to this, you'll gain an ability called Heroic Opportunity, which allows you to chain certain attacks together for more powerful effects. To start a Heroic Opportunity, use the skill that starts the chain, and then use the skills that are flashing on your bar before the timer expires. When done correctly, you'll notice an effect on your character, and those are almost always the key to faster victories when you're fighting against tougher enemies. Questing and leveling follows a pretty set and standard pattern, and being considered one of the originators of the genre, that is to be expected. There's not to say that there aren't interesting twists that I'm surprised haven't been seen in some more recent MMOs. For one, when you're targeting an enemy, an arrow and highlight will appear on that enemy. But if you tend to notice that more than one enemy is highlighted when you select one, it'll indicate that the enemies highlighted will attack you as a group, and you can prepare for that fight accordingly. Another interesting and useful feature is that once you've surpassed a level of creatures who would no longer grant you experience for fighting and defeating them, those level creatures will no longer attack you unless you strike them first, even if they were normally aggressive enemies. Elites or stronger enemies will be annotated with arrows appearing above their life bar, with the number of arrows annotating how much more difficult the fight should be. You can also use Examine to gauge the general suggestion of whether or not you should take an enemy down. Enemies that you'll need to kill for a quest will be marked with a quill feather icon. Sometimes the icon won't vanish once you finish the quest, until you at least turn it in, so you might need to check your quest log by pressing J to see if it's time to turn in that quest or to keep killing more enemies. While questing doesn't go too far out of the norm, there are some interesting twists to some of the quests on occasion, most notably when you're asked to kill a certain type of enemy, and then once you reach the appropriate area you would find them in, you'll find that those enemies that you needed to kill have already been slaughtered, and you'll now have to investigate who beat you to the punch. Once you reach level 10, you'll gain access to the alternate advancement system, which allows you to tweak your character to your liking, but by default you'll be given a list of preset builds that'll fit a certain playstyle, which by default will be solo mode, but you can also select the group and PvP play options or customize your own. Experience points you earn are partially given towards the alternate advancement points, and I noticed that while it seems like you can adjust the amount of points that are given to your level versus the points that be given to your alternate advancement, I was unable to do anything but an even 50-50 split. It might be that it's just locked to free players, but perhaps I just missed something. Your inventory follows the standard of set number of slots for bags of various quantity, but they behave in an odd manner that might take some getting used to. For one, the minute you find a better bag to equip, you'll need to manually drag an empty bag out of one of the slots into another bag slot, and then manually drag the new bag into the empty slot. This is done on the character equipment screen, accessible by pressing C. New skills will be added to your hotbars as you level, but if you wish to inspect or pick and choose your skills to better suit your playstyle, hit K to look over the list of what's available to you. While you're out questing, you might notice a glowing spot on the ground marked with a question mark. These will denote a collection node, and in a system similar to the one I'd mentioned in Rift, looting this will grant you a random item that'll be put into a collection and can be filled out for a reward. So much for Rift having that as an original idea. There are also multiple crafting nodes scattered around the map, and while you don't need a special item to perform any kind of collection, there is a skill point counter associated with item collection that increases with your level. Keep in mind that you will need to keep looting these items to keep your skill level up, as the skill level required to loot and even the next logical area to head to requires nearly the maximum amount of skill level from the lowest level suggested for that area. Crafting items cannot be sold to NPCs, but they can be traded to other players. You'll get a small crafting tutorial when starting out, telling you the basics of gathering nodes, with fish being the trickiest to find, as they don't just appear prominently as the other nodes. In order to find a fishing spot, just run very close to a nearby coastline, and you should be able to spot them just next to the waterline. Once you reach the main city, in my case the Tree City of Kelethin, you'll be given a second part of the crafting quest, which will give you a small taste of each of the professions before you're asked to specialize in only a few of them. The crafting system in this game is actually kind of interesting and acts a bit like a minigame. While creating an item, you'll have 6 skills on the bottom which can be activated by clicking the icons, or by pressing the corresponding hotkeys. 3 of these skills will conserve the item's durability, and 3 of them will speed up the crafting process. Occasionally, the crafting process will run across a problem, and you'll need to press a corresponding icon in order to correct it, or the item will take a massive durability hit. Making sure that you have enough durability left over when crafting an item is the key to successfully making it, so you can't just click Make 20 items and walk away from the game. It's easy to spend a lot of time just crafting the items, and it is a bit of fun. Reaching the main city will also grant you access to the housing system, where you can rent out a room for a fairly small fee, upgrade to better rooms once you have the cash for it, and place numerous furniture pieces that you can either purchase, receive as quest rewards, or even craft yourself. I really like the housing system, and while I felt my dingy stone room in Kinos wasn't all that impressive, the spacious hunting lodge in New Halas, and of course my hollowed out split-level tree in Kelethin really gave a cozy and atmospheric feel. Placing furniture is also quite simple to do, and players have created some very impressive living quarters. It's worth checking out. As I mentioned earlier, some enemies and allies speak their own language, and it's entirely possible to actually learn those languages if you have the right quests for them. They'll even go one step further, as learning the language will not only translate the massive symbols that you used to see when they would speak, but it'll also change their voice acting to English. It's a pretty cool touch, and I wish that some other MMOs with multiple language systems would adopt something like it. The death penalty is somewhat lax. It's more severe than a lot of recent MMOs, but it's nothing that's full-on detraction. Once you're killed, you have the option to respawn at a list of areas, usually only containing one, maybe two options, or you just wait for someone to come by and res you. If you choose to respawn, you'll be given a short Resurrection Sickness debuff that's rarely longer than a minute or two, then be given a short amount of XP debt, where the experience that you gain will be shortened until the debt is paid off. It's the same system that was also seen in City of Heroes. Also, it seems that death is the only time that you'll take item durability damage, so make sure to stop by a Mender NPC to repair what you're wearing. The cost isn't really all that much when starting out. Fast travel in this game comes in three ways. First, there are fast travel stations that are scattered along the map that will give you an autopathing animal to ride on until you reach your destination. These range from horses, griffins, rideable floating discs, and will only take you to places within that zone. Main cities also have teleport stations that will take you to other cities and areas. Neither of these will cost you any cash to use. Finally, you can set your home point with a skill in any place that you'd like, and you can teleport there every 20 minutes. Or less if you place points in a certain skill, but let's not get pedantic. A quest found in the first area also granted me a mount, which was a total godsend. Even though the Ranger class has a movement speed increase by default, it still took quite a while to get around the seriously large maps in this game. The mount is a major movement speed increase, and makes things a lot easier once you obtain one. I found my mount quest around level 17 near the final area of the first zone. Speaking of that, I found the pacing of the quests in this game kind of strange. Early quests were really simplistic and plentiful, and I outleveled my tasks almost immediately. But heading past that first short area was like nearly hitting a wall, where enemies attacked in larger groups, were far more level matched to me, and were overall tougher to overcome unless you scrape up a few more levels. Then you'll reach the second quest hub, and you'll once again stay far ahead of your intended level for quests, and in this case it lasted for nearly the entirety of the zone until about level 16. But the final quest hub has you sailing through monsters of level 16 through 20 in the exact same block of quests. This is a game where levels really seem to matter. Being outleveled by an enemy, even by a few, is enough to make the fight more challenging than you would expect, at least for certain classes, to go it alone. Clearing out that final area of the first zone just seemed like it was giving me greater amounts of gear that I couldn't equip and tasked to fight enemies that were beyond my current capabilities, turning parts of this game into a word that I really don't want to use right now. Managing to at least eke out level 20 within a fairly generous time frame of 2 weeks grants you a title reward with a really nice boost to in-game cash. Of course, maybe just want to skip over all this early game fluffery, get yourself some high-end gear, get a nice flying mount, jump right up to level 85. Well, here's the deal going on with that. I get why this is such a point of contention in the community. There are hundreds of thousands of players who slog through the entire game, tweaking and building their character, and taking them through all the trials and tribulations of this game and its previous expansions, and now we have a bunch of high-powered newbies running around unable to figure out how their hotbar works. I've found that compared to starting fresh, heroic characters are hilariously powerful. You know that point I just made about level gaps mattering and solo encounters being challenging if you're not appropriately level matched? For heroic characters? No. I soloed a 3-arrow elite, something that the game would suggest I have taken on with a party of 3 or more, with my heroic inquisitor, and I kept forgetting I even had a healing spell. Once I had a grasp on the mechanics, I had no issue using my heroic character, and I can see why the community would have a problem with this, but those are all words for a different category. Hey, remember that weird webcam feature I mentioned? Let's talk about that now. The feature is referred to as SOE Emote, and uses your webcam to track the motion and position of your eyes, eyebrows, jaw, and mouth to generally frightening effect. It's well matched, sure, but your character tends to open its mouth really far, and you can make some generally hilarious and terrifying faces. Keep in mind, whether or not you have mirror mode active, a window that'll show your character's face, your character model will always be matching your expressions if you have the SOE Emote on. In this mode, you can also allow for some voice masking, which is generally terrible, and set if you want to broadcast your voice to those in the immediate area who also have this feature activated. It's a very intriguing system, and I have no idea how utilized it actually is in the community. It would probably make for some really interesting machinima, or horrifying. I noticed that the game generally doesn't allow you to attack other players' monsters, like at all. Once a monster is tagged by another player, a lock will appear next to their name, and they cannot be attacked by you. I understand the reason, but I can't help but feel like a jerk when I can't help someone out who's clearly in trouble. And keep in mind, if the opposite happens to you, it's not that the other people are being jerks by watching you die, because they can't help you. At least they're probably not being jerks. This is a game with a lot of quirks and a lot of systems to understand, and it'll feel ultimately confusing to new characters. You might be tempted to ask other players for feedback in the public channels. Something as simple as, hey, where's this enemy, or how do I change this option? And as soon as you try to hit enter in a channel and ask, you'll notice that you can't. This is another former subscription free-to-play game that does not want to let you use the chat channels unless you've paid the $5 to upgrade to the silver account. And again, if your answer is, well, it's only $5, just pay for it! No! We've been over this. Long-distance player trade is most easily made through the broker NPCs, who are also restricted by both free users and silver account users. But at least silver accounts can use the auction chat channel, which players seem to be running as an actual auction. Like going once, going twice kind of stuff. Color me impressed. The chat channels do tend to behave themselves. I've seen people idiotically respond to obvious trolls, spouting the WoW word and sending everyone into a frenzy instead of just ignoring someone who's obviously trying to piss them off. But more often than not, I'd actually seen people who'd ask questions get them answered. I'd seen actual intelligent discourse going on about MMO mechanics, and gaming in general. It was a solid group of people playing on Antonia Bale, for the most part. There is a dungeon finder for when the game tosses you into one of those all your quests are in a dungeon situations, but I honestly didn't see anyone using it, at least in the newbie area. It doesn't seem like the most reliable way to get a group, but it's there at least. High-level players looking to help you out will normally sap your experience from the fights if they're 10 levels above you, but they can choose to level match you through the game's mentoring system, and it's not uncommon for higher-level characters or heroic characters to swing by in a starter area and offer to help out the newbie players. Here's where that controversy over level 85 characters comes once again into play. I don't consider myself an elitist, nor do I believe that just because a player is jumping straight into level 85 does it necessarily mean that they're going to be a terrible player. I see it as a system that would allow a new player into the game to play alongside their high-level friends who I assume would be coaching and guiding them throughout the latest levels, and teaching them how to get through the game's quirks just so that they can be capable players. And then we've got this past event where people can just jump into the game making a level 85 character for free and have no idea what they're doing. I know this for a fact. While the first character I created was a heroic, as soon as I saw the windows pop up I knew I had to take it slow and went back to a level 1. It's just a pity that not everyone else did the same. I only ended up partying up with 2 players in this game, as I declined the offer to help from the first person who had asked me, as I considered being level 1 to 2 a bit early to require playing alongside someone. But reaching the second area Butcher block, in which I was repeatedly getting outclassed by the enemies in the quests, I did welcome some help. Granted, I got 2 very different kinds of help. The first was obviously from one of these aforementioned newbie heroic characters. There is nothing more confusing than having a level 85 character offering to help you, and then end up having to answer half the questions they have. I had him say he was going to go AFK to talk to his guild seconds after sending me a party invite. Then, rather than assist with my quest, he asked me where to get a mount, and he was riding one. Then he asked if I wanted to join his guild, and told me to message his guild leader to join, without telling me what his guild leader's name was. Then he asked me to lead him to the place I got the mount from so that he could follow me there, and then when I did, he proceeded to ask me why I went there in the first place. He then went AFK again. These are the actions of a level 5 player, or a 5-year-old child. I'm not entirely ruling that possibility out. The exact opposite moment happened when I was attempting to complete tasks in the first dungeon, which oddly was not instanced. The player there actually answered a lot of my questions and helped out with my quest, so I could at least clear out a few of them. Unfortunately, a story about an actual helpful player isn't as interesting, but I thank him nonetheless. Long story short, the community in the game is helpful, if you can reach them. Since you can join guilds in this game as a free account, it might be a good idea to look over the chat for guilds that are recruiting and whisper the person who sent the message, since you can at least send tells as a free player. At least then you can join a group of players who'd be more than willing to help you throughout this game. I really don't advise playing this game solo, and it doesn't really seem built around that, especially if you're in it for the long haul. This cash shop, at least at start, seems a bit on the intimidating side, but there's really only a few things of notice here. There is a lot of cosmetic outfits, and since all you need to do to keep your appearance of an item is to drag it into your appearance tab in the character slot, it's not that hard to choose an in-game armor piece that you'd like as well. Still, if something in here suits you, it's there if you want it. I personally wasn't too impressed by any of the outfits offered, but at least they are permanent. Mounts are also offered in the shop, and despite being pricey, they are also permanent, and any game that allows me to ride a giant fanged squirrel is okay in my book. Most useful would probably be the Perk Unlocks, as there are interesting and useful content features that you can't use unless your account has unlocked them, like the Dungeon Maker, which is pretty self-explanatory, and the Mercenaries option, which grants you NPCs that'll follow and assist you in battle. Keep in mind the upcoming expansion is also available in here for purchase, and given that you have access to every previous expansion in this game for free, seems odd to charge you for the latest one now, but they gotta get paid for their efforts somehow. Now, taking another page from the ever-popular former subscription model is the tiers system. As I made mention, paying 500 station cash, aka $5, will unlock a silver account, which admittedly isn't all that bad for the perks that are unlocked. While I consider the lack of chat access for free players, or the inability to mail items to others, both free players and silver players, to be a bit on the stifling side, it's not overtly detrimental. Getting silver to unlock the chat is hardly the only perk, as you're also given 2 more character slots, access to higher spell tiers, and of course the ability to create your own guild. Really, I lean more toward the extra character slots being the reason to drop cash for silver, but I am a bit of an altaholic. The other tier, of course, is the might as well be subscribed to it tier of gold, which increases character slots to 7 and unlocks everything restricted to silver accounts, for the standard subscription price of $14.99 a month. Subbing also comes with the added bonus of being given an extra 500 station cash a month as long as you're subbed. I wonder if those could be used on Dragon's Prophet and DCUO. An old-school MMO featuring old-school gameplay should shock no one, but this kind of game unquestionably has an audience. And not just for those who would miss the old style of these games. There's a depth and complexity to what you can do that's often being overlooked in modern MMOs for the sake of streamlining. And there's something refreshing now about playing a game with this level of complexity and much to explore. Still, it's a game that might require a lot of assistance for new players to grasp, and being locked out of chat without paying into it might be a bit of a detriment for those who want to go into the game without a personal escort. Here's my final rating. For those who want to play the older style of MMOs and harken back to when most games didn't send you on a set path of showpieces, and granted you most everything with a small amount of effort, then Everquest 2 might be worth getting into, or getting back into. Those who prefer games that have large worlds and lots to explore should also enjoy this game, as there's plenty to cover even in the opening areas, where you could spend hours, even days in the first area, and barely scratch the surface of what there is to be seen in the game. Combat in the game might feel much slower compared to modern titles like Terra and Guild Wars 2, but when you tend to notice how spells interact, or how certain actions require positioning, and how heroic opportunities work, there's a method to all of it, requiring more of a strategy beyond cooldown over, hit hotkey again. Finally, those interested in variety might enjoy the sheer amount of classes and races, and any game that lets you play as a dark minstrel fairy is okay in my book. With a tiered game, it's not a bad idea that once you've gotten your feet wet, so to speak, to drop at least the money to get the silver tier unlocked. Of course, if you're really into it, you can subscribe with a gold account. Silver tier grants you more character slots, not by much, but it's nice having more slots to the massive amount of characters and races to try out. Also, having access to the general chat is pretty important to this game if you have no one to show you the ropes. Since the combat is more methodical and the market has recently shifted to being more action-oriented, a combat system like the one used in this game will probably feel sluggish, and those used to more current systems probably won't enjoy this. In addition to the more methodical and slower-paced combat system, the game does not lend itself well to solo play, especially for new characters, and I don't just mean in terms of difficulty. There are a lot of systems in place that could just be better explained by the community, but you're practically locked out from them unless someone finds you first. It's nice that there's people to help you, but if you feel that they shouldn't have to, you might not want to give this a try. Next time, it's another Halloween episode. My options for those are getting kind of limited, aren't they? You're aware that with Guild Wars 2, The Secret World, and Defiance all being official episodes that didn't have numbers with them, episode 50 was actually episode 47 on Firefall, right?